Hey guys, it's me, Sam Stein, managing editor at the Bulwark. I'm joined by two colleagues, Lauren Egan, Jonathan Cohn. I didn't list them in any order based on my appreciation for them.
Yes,
Trust
you
me.
did.
Reverse appreciation for them. We're going to be talking about
Sam.
we're going to be talking about Democrats, specifically what we think are three distinct ways that the parties decided to take on Donald Trump. We're going to get into all of that in a bit, but before we do, public service announcement. You would be wise, very wise, to subscribe to our YouTube feed. A lot of good stuff here. Get it. Make sure you have it. Subscribe to the feed. Thank you very much. All right, Jonathan, I'm going to start with you because you wrote the piece over the weekend. Your the premise of your piece was that there's two models that Michigan Democrats specifically are employing. We're going to get to another Midwestern politician in a second, but there's two models that Democrats are employing when it comes to, or deploying, I should say, when it comes to Donald Trump. There's the Whitmer model, and then there's Alyssa Slotkin model. And very briefly as Cohn can get,
you've been looking at the reader comments.
I've edited you for several years prior to you coming to the Bulwark, so I know. But how do you describe those models?
The Whitmer model, as it has emerged, because everyone remembers Gretchen Whitmer from the Fight Like Hell by PAC, and was fighting with Trump and COVID. After Trump got elected, her model was, look, he's the president. We, the state of Michigan, depend on working with the federal government. So I'm going to work with the federal government. And her model has been, she's been to Washington a number of times. She's lobbied him directly on matters that she thinks are important. Those include, there was a big air base here and its future was in doubt. She lobbied hard to have an extra squadron brought there to replace a retiring squadron. It's a big economic matter for that part of Michigan. That was awarded. In the process of lobbying, she ended up in the Oval Office in a now famous, a picture where she was like, don't take my picture. Trump was in that Air Force base last week, and she was there. And so a lot of pictures of her standing next to Trump. She has, it's a less adversarial, I would say, trying to sort of,
so that's one model. Then there's the Slotkin model.
Yeah. So Slotkin, who, also kind of a bipartisan, very much presents herself as a bipartisan senator who, appeals to Republicans as well as Democrats, really recently has kind of turned up the volume on her attacks on Trump. And I saw her give a speech a couple weeks ago here in Michigan. And it was notable to me how adversarial it was. And, especially on the topic of tariffs, where her line was, sometimes tariffs work, and if they're part of a, economic strategy, sure, which actually is something Whitmer has said. But It was couched as you got to do it right. And the way Trump is doing it, he's so unpredictable and it's all over the place and it's ruining our relationships with our allies. And just, it was a very direct, harsh attack. And she very much was making that point in her speech that we Democrats need to come on stronger, need to be more aggressive at sort of prosecuting the case against Trump. So that's really the difference. That's sort of vocal. I'm going to go after Trump. I'm going to attack him, or I'm going to work with him where I have to because my state depends on it.
Right. All right. Now there's a third model, Lauren. I'm not sure how we've dubbed this, but we're going to call it the J.B. Pritzker model, which is what?
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar to the Slotkin model. No.
It's just go for the throat.
Yeah, just to be really aggressive, right? To just be out there shitting on Trump, right? But that's kind of her personality too. But yeah, it's to go at Trump for everything, all the time, constantly. And I think there's a few governors that fall into that camp. It's like Pritzker, Tim Walz has been doing that. Yeah. Who else can you think of? Oh, Josh Shapiro has been doing that too. And I mean, yeah. Yeah, he's been pretty aggressive.
I'll give him that.
But I mean, they're also all probably have an eye towards their own.
Yeah, but so does Whitmer
too.
Well, no, Whitmer's term limited. So here's my thinking about this. These are all three politicians who have national profiles. I'm talking about Whitmer, Slotkin. She did deliver the State of the Union response, and Pritzker, obviously. They all have national profiles. They're all kind of adopting different models here to a degree. Whitmer, and I think, Cohn, you mentioned this piece, or at least we talked about it, which is Whitmer's from a state where it's a divided government, whereas Pritzker's not. Whitmer may have a different view of her political future than Pritzker, who clearly has an eye on the White House. But are there any other reasons that you guys suspect to explain why they're adopting different approaches beyond those two?
I will say this is, having covered Whitmer specifically over the years, she is kind of in her bones, like this bipartisan, we should all get along and find ways to work, even if we're enemies. That's actually a pretty big part of her identity, for better or worse, depending on your, perspective. Her dad was a Republican, her mom was a Democrat. She always talks about that. So I do think some of it is personal style. I think some of it is her political calculation, being in a divided state that voted for Trump. I think she's very aware of the fact that she's got a lot of constituents who like Trump, and on issues like trade, immigration, I think she's very conscious of that. So I think that's her personality, both in terms of what she believes in and how she reads the political landscape.
And Lauren, the other thing is, how much flexibility do they have with their own voters on this? And that's something that I think is kind of like an existential question for Democrats. Like even today, we're taping this on Monday. Muriel Bowser, mayor of DC, is with Trump in the Oval Office. She's there because they're announcing the NFL draft is going to be in DC in 2027. I'm struck by the fact that Trump has been fairly nasty towards her over the years. They just signed a bill. The House did. They passed it, in fact, stripping $1 billion from the city budget. They've had a really adversarial relationship, but this year she's decided, well, I gotta, there's tangible benefits to be had if I actually can talk to the president and build a relationship with him. The White House reportedly wants to get that $1 billion back to the DC budget. Now he's got this NFL draft thing. So, she's going to be fine, but I am kind of curious, like, do Democratic voters recognize the distinctions and the nuances that Jonathan's writing about?
I think for the most part, no. Like we keep hearing from a lot of these, not right. I think we keep hearing from a lot of these voters that they want their elected leaders to fight for them, whatever that may look like. And that really is, I think, like a style thing that
could
people want.
Could that just be like the base of the base, right? Like the loudest people who are like,
sure, it's like the people that are online that are complaining about it. Yeah, but like, I don't know, you have to be like really like read into sort of like the latest like policy negotiations or conversations to also know that like there's a reason that she might want to be showing up to the White House today. So I think that like to your point like kind of cuts both ways. But yeah, I think this is like, I don't know, like some Democrats, when we were talking about Whitmer, I think there was a frustration that they get where she was coming from. They get it. You want to get tangible results. But I think there was also the sense that like, okay, but what's good for Michigan is also like, you need to look big picture, like legitimizing Trumpism in the Republican Party long-term isn't good for Michigan either. And so I think there was some frustration in terms of like how you define like what's good for your constituents in this moment. That I think is pretty interesting, like debate that's playing out in the party.
Cohn, how does that play out in Michigan? Because Whitmer's not running again, but there is an open Senate Democratic primary. And so, I feel like there might be a way in which her approach to Trump might be a kind of dividing issue in that primary itself.
You would assume so, right? I mean, It's something that didn't make it into my story because there wasn't space.
What?
One of the Dana Nessel, who's our attorney general here, also very high profile, quite openly critical. I mean, she didn't mention Governor Whitmer by name, but has been sort of subtweeting Whitmer for the last few months saying, I don't want to legitimize Trump in any way I can. And, the Senate field now for the open Senate seat, it's going to have Mallory Gamoro, who's pretty progressive, Abdul El Sayed, who's really progressive, and who had challenged Whitmer in 2018 for the Democratic nomination that she eventually won and gave her a good run for the money. And then Haley Stevens, who's more of a kind of establishment type. But this is the dynamic here is, you were saying, is it just the online people? Is it just the base? And I suspect to some extent, sure, I do think that's true. I think the anger at Whitmer for cozying up to Trump is, disproportionately coming from people who are very invested right now. Flip side is when you're in a Democratic primary, they do have probably a little outside influence. That eventually you do have to get to the general election. I'm sure if you had Gretchen Whitmer here, she would say, yeah, but the people you actually need to win the general election, they're the ones who are going to appreciate the fact that even though they know I hate Trump, I got jobs. Yeah. And so, it's a dilemma.
Well, okay, but hold on. Yes, but there is I'm just going to throw this out as the devil's advocate, and Lauren, you can take it, and Cohn, you can take it, but like the flip side is maybe you can stand up to Trump and get stuff done. And I guess the model here is Janet Mills. So the backstory here is Janet Mills, governor of Maine, kind of famously stood up to Trump during a meeting early in his administration over trans athletes in her state. I think there's like a handful maybe, and they want all trans athletes banned. Mills says it's a state issue. We'll deal with it however we want. And then Trump, of course, in a classic bit of fit, decided he was just going to like pull supplemental, SNAP benefits, child nutrition from the state of Maine, and then Maine sued. And then over the weekend, the suit was resolved, and basically Maine won. Mills is quoted as telling a paper, quote, "It's good to feel a victory like this. We took him to court and we won." And that's it. I mean, she stood up, she won. She didn't, feel the need to stand with him at the Oval Office or at some event to make sure that everything went well. She fought the fight. Now, Janet Mills doesn't have a political future, and Gretchen Whitmer might, but is that not another model to showcase?
Yes, but I think it's risky business. It is risky, yeah. That might not. They might not have won. Like, we don't know how that court case could have gone, or like.
Well, the fact that they settled suggests we know where it was going.
Sure. I'm saying like insert another issue, like whatever the next thing might be from Trump, right? Like this, now that he knows they are going to have to settle for something like this, like what would he try to do next time? So I think you get why someone like Whitmer or other governors are fearful of that and want to be sensitive to that. Like, it's great that this worked out for Maine, but that's not necessarily going to be the case every single time for every single governor on every single issue.
I mean, the flip side is Gavin Newsom has not gotten disaster relief for California for the wildfires, despite doing his best
Gavin Newsom and being kind of all over the map on things.
Yes,
so he's hard to put in a box.
Yeah, he jumps between the boxes.
He can't decide.
Cohen, any last thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just say, I mean, I think it's a genuinely tough call, and that's why I read about policy, not politics, because I'm not the strategist here. I can see it both ways.
Yeah,
I know, great TV, right? Then you're supposed to take an opinion.
No, I mean, it's a very profound.
It's true, though.
Very profound thought. I think it's true. I mean, it honestly is true, and I think people who try to deal in absolutes on this issue, I mean, look, Gretchen Whitmer got a lot of stuff done. Now there was a lot of humiliation that came with it. That was the price tag. And she's going to be, she may have risked a fair bit of her political future, but she did get stuff done. I think the Slotkin model probably is the best one, to be honest. I feel like strategic engagement on the Trump wars, where you feel good about it, is probably the smartest thing to do. But who knows? She's not in the governor's seat, so she doesn't have the same responsibilities.
Yeah, I was just going to say there is more. I mean, we got to. I know if you're thinking like presidential 2028 contenders, we got a ways to go. There's gonna be more issues, so let's see how this plays out. Maybe
that's true.
Like Medicaid cuts, that she ends up coming out fight. If you're Whitmer or any of these people, and you have a mix of times when you can say I did fight here, I didn't fight there. Maybe that makes a difference.
I think we're sort of colored, yes, and I think we're just sort of colored by what happens in these kind of iconic moments. Right, like you remembered like Charlie Crist hugging Obama when he deplaned, and Chris Christie after Hurricane Sandy. Like those things did matter materially in a very sort of superficial sense, but in a real political sense too. And so Whitmer with the folder in front of her, I think, is going to be one of those iconic moments. But then again, Trump gives you plenty of fodder, so we shall see. All right, Lauren, Jonathan, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching on the tube. As always, subscribe to the feed, and we will catch you later.
Hey, YouTube fam. If you want to support the Bulwark, the best way to do it is by becoming a YouTube Bulwark Plus member. The Bulwark is truly independent. We have no corporate overlords. We're not settling any dumb lawsuits with Trump. By joining, you help support our work, and you can get a bunch of perks right here on this platform. Ad-free content, bonus videos, live streams, and some emojis of me, which I guess some people want. So come join, come hang out, become a Bulwark YouTube Plus member, and I'll be seeing you in the comments. So behave.